Hello and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Creative Placemaking webinar, Perspectives of Artists and Developers. We're glad to have you with us. My name is Frederick Zindel, and I'm a Program Associate here at Enterprise, supporting our culture and creativity work, along with our Green Communities program, and I'll be your host today. Just a few logistics before we get started. We're looking forward to your questions, and you can submit them to our panelists at any time by using the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be pausing at several points throughout the session to address questions, so type them in as you think of them. As it says here, please direct your questions to all panelists, which is the default. Most of you are using the streaming audio, and it usually works just fine. However, sometimes local conditions can cause interference. If that happens to you, you can switch to a phone line for audio. To get the dial-in numbers, click on the little circle to the left of the red button on the bottom of your screen. Once that menu opens, click Audio Connection, then switch audio. From there, follow the prompts, and you should be able to call in. We will be using video in this webinar. If you would like a full screen view of our presenters, click on the full screen icon on the upper right side of the video area. Hitting the escape key will bring you back to the regular view. When you leave this event, you'll automatically be taken to a quick survey. We'd love to get your feedback. This event will be recorded. We'll be sending a link to the archive to all of today's participants within the next couple of weeks. Today, I will start us off with a brief introduction to Enterprise and our Culture and Creativity program. Then I'll hand it over to Nellie Young and Maya Sharpie, who will have a conversation with our panelists. For those who aren't familiar with Enterprise, we are a national nonprofit in the housing community development field. We invest in the design and development of high-quality housing, but we also know that housing alone isn't enough to connect people to the resources and support they need to build healthy lives and experience upward economic mobility. This is why we also invest in strategies that build local capacity and uplift residents' voices in the development process. Research and experience have shown that investing in cultural expression and creative processes can lead to important community development outcomes. It can strengthen trust and make communities more resilient. It can benefit the local economy and build community wealth. It can also contribute to a built environment that honors and reflects residents' voices and vision. Over the years, we have done a series of programs and grants that have helped us to learn about the intersection of community development and creative and artistic practices. These are some examples of blog posts and resources on our website you can check out to learn more about what we do. Early this year, we'll be releasing some publications, or later on this year, we'll be releasing some publications that have examples of creative placemaking in case studies and actions. We'll share that announcement with everyone who registered for this webinar when those are available. Now I'm going to turn it over to Nellie Young, Senior Program Director of our Culture and Creativity Programming here at Enterprise. Welcome, Nella.
Hi, thanks, Frederick. Can you see me? Am I on video?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Great. So I just wanted to take a minute before we get into the conversation and share why we organized this webinar series and also share some exciting developments that we're going to announce later this month. So Frederick mentioned we've been really on a learning journey at Enterprise and with our partner organizations to understand how culture and creativity can become more fundamental to the way that community developers do their work. And as a national organization, we are always thinking about how to share what we're learning from partners around the country. And we often do this by creating programs and publications and toolkits, which you can find on our website. But rather than wait to have a final polished deliverable, we really wanted to use this series of conversations to dive in midstream and open up the discussion that we've been having to others on the field to join along and listen in. And so we continue to have a lot of questions that we want to understand about how to leverage culture and creativity in community development, like how can we make it easier? How do artists and community developers need to adjust their usual ways of working when they collaborate? For artists, we're often thinking, what would you wish community developers knew before they hired you? And for community developers, what should you look for when you're seeking to partner with artists? One of the questions we're always asking for everyone is, what is this actually helping you to do better? And if it's a new kind of collaboration for you, what helps people get started? So today is our last webinar in this series, and we are very excited to be having a conversation with two pairs of artists and developers who've worked together closely for a while now, and we're going to hear from them in a minute. But first, I wanted to share with you all a little sneak peek of some exciting information. Part of the reason this is such a great timing to have this conversation right now is that in early February, we're going to be officially announcing an expansion of our Rose Fellowship program to include community-engaged artists in addition to architects, which have been the traditional fellows in our program for the last nearly 20 years. So if you're an artist working in community, or if you want to share this opportunity with your networks, the official announcement and the locations for those fellowships and the online application and all that information will be open in early February. And those fellowships will begin in October. So there will be a lot more chances in the coming months to hear about that opportunity and to ask more of the questions about that program once it's announced. But for those of you who signed in today, you get the early notice. So with that, I am excited to welcome Maya Sharpie. Maya is the founder of the design research firm Creative Agency. Maya's been a creative collaborator of ours for years now at Enterprise, and she's really been a wonderful moderator of this series of conversations about the integration of culture and creativity in community development. So Maya is going to introduce our panelists and will join me in facilitating the conversation today. Welcome, Maya.
Thank you so much, Nella. So I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a minute, but first, we actually want to hear from you. We want this conversation to go two ways. So take a minute and find that chat box that Frederick oriented you to, and type in the chat box, who are you? Are you a developer? Are you an artist? Are you something else? We want to know who you are and why you're here listening to this conversation. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that. And while you do that, I just want to highlight that this conversation is really a moment of translation. So we're going to have the community developers on one hand, artists on the other hand. It's going to be, a little bit like, almost like a game show where you've got, here's my perspective, wait a second, how did this work? But it's really about a moment of getting a chance to get in each other's heads, to understand how each other thinks, and to figure out how we can add value. So artists, how can you be doing more of this community work? How do community developers think about this work? And then how can you align yourself with that, and vice versa with community developers? So hopefully we've got some comments from people about who they are and what brought them here. And yeah, one last thing we want to ask you to think about before I introduce the panelists is, what is one question you would like to get answered today? What is one question that you would like to get answered today? As Nella mentioned, if this is going to help you move forward in your work, what is one question that would help you move forward that you would like to get answered? Okay, so I am so excited to introduce you first to Jen Song. Jen is the arts manager at the Seattle Housing Authority, where she oversees arts and culture programs, including artist residencies, public artworks, community art projects, youth media, and economic development. And those activities support the redevelopment of Yesler Terrace, which is a 30-acre low-income housing site that's undergoing a major transformation into a mixed-income community. I also want to introduce you to Rachel Kessler. Rachel is a multimedia artist and the artist in residence at Yesler Terrace. Rachel considers herself a teaching artist and has been doing interactive literary performing art in Seattle for the last 20 years. Welcome, Jen and Rachel.
Hi there.
Hey there. Glad you can join us today. And then, yeah, and then I also want to introduce you to Chelsea Alger. Chelsea is a grant writer and community developer for the Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership, which is a nonprofit CDA focused on the affordable housing needs of a rural region that has over 27 counties. Chelsea leads the partnership art effort launched by the 2015 Artplace CDI grant that they received, and has thoroughly enjoyed exploring the ways that arts and community development can intersect to create more meaningful and sustainable outcomes for communities. And then I also want to introduce you to her collaborator, Ashley Hanson. Ashley is a community engagement artist. She's the founder of Place-Based Productions, which is a theater company that creates original site-specific musicals celebrating small-town life. She's also the founder of the Department of Public Transformation, which is an artist-led organization that collaborates with local leaders in rural areas to develop creative strategies for community connection and for civic participation. So welcome, Chelsea and Ashley.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Hey there. So glad that you're here. Okay, well, so to get us started and to set the context for us, what I want to do is actually start with Rachel and Jen and have you tell us really briefly, just to get people up to speed, about your collaboration and about the community that you're based in and working in.
Should I start? Hi everybody, I'm Jen, I'm the arts administrator. And so the project that we're working on is the Yesler Terrace redevelopment. And so essentially, we're moving around 560 units of low-income housing into a mixed-income community that will ultimately be 5,000 units of very low-income and market rate housing, low-income housing and market rate housing as well. And so our original Yesler Terrace community, the historic community that's lived in SHA housing, is super diverse. Many of them have been living in that area for years. And they're come from all over. It's mostly an immigrant population, and it's around 92% non-white community. So we have, at any given community meeting, we might have 5 languages translated. There's something like 16 languages that are spoken in the community. And we have a number of network services for the different affinity groups that exist at Yesler Terrace.
Okay, that's great. And then to just give us a little bit of context around what Rachel is doing.
All right, so I've been an artist in residence for about 1.5 years, and I started out just wanting to know what the community would like from an artist, and there was an interest in having sort of like open studio art jam times. So we started October of, 2017, just in the lobby of one of the buildings, I would set up a table with all kinds of art supplies, sometimes bring in other artists, but it was every Thursday, and with rarely missing a day. And so a pretty diverse group of residents would come through, and it was interesting to watch people who hadn't had a chance to play around with paint or do anything like that, really like find their own language with paint and with different materials. And it was also part of my secret plan to sort of flesh out any artists that were there in residence that maybe weren't, their work wasn't out in the community, they weren't known in Seattle as artists, but Yesler Terrace has some really amazing visual artists and other kinds of artists. So over time, they were able to come out. It was a very social sort of thing, and then SHA gave me a vacant unit, one that was slated for demolition, and we sort of turned that into a community art hub, and kids, adults came and painted the inside and the outside, and it was a place where we had celebrations, we had dance parties, we had readings in there, and we had some art shows.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'll also say, because somebody asked about looking for ways to activate, engage community and activate spaces. The work that Rachel did with the art clubs in the lobbies was significant for our community because they were really undergoing a huge transformation, and many of them were living in kind of their own garden style townhomes. So they were able to kind of see their neighbors more casually, and suddenly they were living in these kind of mid-rise, like eight-floor apartment buildings with security and all of that. And so I think the community really struggled to kind of find those casual public spaces that really make places and really make neighborhoods. And so even though our buildings actually have beautiful community rooms that face the street, that the residents can access in addition to other staff folks, but the sort of, we're really looking to find opportunities for the residents to kind of come together in those like casual personal spaces that are public and also private in a sense. And so this is the kind of work that we think will push the kind of emotional transition for the community, as we're also working on like the physical the physical place that they're living in.
Yeah, that's really helpful context. So we'll come back to that, but I want to switch over to Chelsea and to Ashley. So give us a little bit about the context of your community and the context of your collaboration.
Sure, well, I can start. The Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership is a regional community development corporation. We serve right now really 27 to 30 counties in rural Southwest and South Central Minnesota focused on housing and community development needs. So one of the things we started noticing probably 10 to 15 years ago is the region has become much more diverse, and many of the developments that we do and residents who live there have become more diverse as a result. And so when we applied for the Artplace Community Development Initiative grant in 2015, our focus was really, or the Artplace CDI focus was looking at CDCs who hadn't done anything with arts and cultural strategies previously. And so our focus was really looking at how could we look at arts and cultural strategies, so partnering with artists to enhance the outreach and impact of the projects and services we provide in the region. And so we came to connect with Ashley through that effort, and I'll let Ashley talk a little bit about maybe how she first viewed the opportunity with us, and we can follow up with then how that connection was made.
So I, receiving a call like the RFP that went out from the Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership, a call for artists to work deeply with communities around affordable housing in rural spaces, and to get paid well for doing it, to get paid a living wage for doing it, is a super rare and very important and valuable opportunity. So seeing a call like that, I know for myself and other artists that do this work specifically in rural communities, it was, kind of just this like glowing light of like, this is happening and people are valuing this work in these spaces. So I initially applied to be one of the community artists. The CDI grant for the Housing Partnership was focused on 3 different communities in the very large region that Chelsea had mentioned. And my theater company, Place-Based Productions, worked with the community of Milan, a town of 369 people. That's 1 square mile wide. And we worked with them for a year and developed a large-scale site-specific musical about home and place. The community of Milan is really unique, as about half of the residents, about 250 of the residents, are a new American community from Micronesia. And the demographic change has happened really within the last 10 to 15 years. So there are a lot of people there doing really great work, but still the cultural divide is quite large. So we worked specifically on, the history of immigration in the region, and how to help connect both of these communities, this traditional kind of Scandinavian community that has lived there long term, with the new residents that have moved in within the last 10 to 15 years. And then after that, there was a call for an artist in residence to work specifically with the organization. So moving from a community of 369 people to a community of really 26 people, working specifically with the staff. And I applied for that resident artist position, and I've been there since February of last year, so just about a year. And we can go into that a little bit more, what that looks like or why that transition happened, but that's how it all got started.
Yeah. Well, so, sorry, no,
go for it, Chelsea. I was just going to say, the only thing I would add to that from our perspective is we started this effort really focusing on our external community relationships and came to understand that it was just as important to strengthen and enhance the relationships amongst ourselves as an organization as it was to make those connections externally, because we just work better together when we can all connect. And we knew that based on the work we had done so far externally and some of the results we were getting back, that we could work with an artist and find new and creative ways to engage and interact with each other and solve problems and look at challenges within the organization in a different way.
Yeah. So I'm so glad you said that, Chelsea, because I want to dig in with that a little bit with Ashley. Ashley, will you just give us a quick just overview of that internal work that you've been doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was fun because I used the same process as I do when developing a script for a play, though the product was different. As a place-based and inquiry-based artist, I really let the questions in the process determine the product when it's not like a specific theater piece. So I started with story circles to find out the recommendations from the within, like where the challenges exist, and then developed a working group. So we called them staff-led projects. Where the staff was partnered with different departments to create and paired with an artist, a consultant artist, to come up with creative strategies to address internal challenges together, so using their own creativity internally. I also created a series of podcasts for each staff member as we have this very large region, we spend a lot of time in the car, traveling from place to place. People felt disconnected. So the podcasts are a way to get to know what staff is like off the clock. And then from there, we have come up with a couple of other really large projects that we're continuing to work on. One of them is called the Creative Community Design Build, where we're looking at a framework and process with artists to redevelop vacant spaces on Main Street in small towns and rural communities through an artist-designed community engagement process, which has been an awesome experience. And then we're also creating a theater production called A Prairie Homeless Companion, which is looking at homelessness and housing instability in rural spaces. And that all came out of some of the connections we made with regional artists during this residency through a series of workshops that I developed and with the staff to kind of help integrate this work more into their community engagement work and daily work overall.
Yeah. Well, so Ashley, I want you to kind of put on your Chelsea hat, right? And why do you think Chelsea hired you? Why do you think Chelsea and her organization hired you? Why, I'll be a little cheeky here for a minute, but why are you a good investment for what value are you adding, or what are you accomplishing for Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership in terms of their ultimate goals?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with this work, as you mentioned before, it is hard work, whether it's the artist-engaged work or just the community work, and it takes a lot of time. And I think the artists that, these social practice community-engaged artists really understand that. And the value that I add to this organization is that I get to take that time. But there's a dedicated staff person, in the office or in the community with the artists that they engage in the community, whose sole purpose is to be a community engagement artist, right? I'm there to build relationships. I am there to listen. I'm there to ask questions that might not get asked internally because I'm not a developer. I'm not a housing specialist. So I might ask questions in a new way or bring a new idea forward from within my field or my experience or my place-based work that developers and housing specialists, they're just so, it's like in it, right? And so having that kind of different bird's eye view and creative approach can help everybody see these challenges a little bit differently and see the places a little bit differently.
Yeah, because it strikes me that, a Prairie Homeless Companion is not a typical project that a CDC might take on, but so a project like that, what is it doing for the organization that couldn't have been done in any other way? What goals is it accomplishing for the organization and its mission?
it's engaging different people, and it's allowing the general public to have more of kind of view of what's actually going on. I mean, when I drive through this region, this 30-county region, and I do a lot of work throughout, and I see all of the different developments that the Housing Partnership has done, and I wouldn't have known that without having been embedded in this organization, like just how much hard work has gone into this region from this one organization. So there's the awareness aspect of that capacity, like just getting the general public to know about that, and then the advocacy work that we can do by bringing to light the invisibility of rural homelessness and rural housing instability, whether it's inviting local politicians to see the theater production or involving them in story circles or in the workshops that we're doing around the region, to hear stories, to listen to the residents and their experiences and where their challenges live in a different way.
Okay, yeah, and Chelsea, I mean, what is it about a story circle that that does something different for your organization than any other tool that you had in your toolkit before that?
Sure. So I think that one of the challenges we face as an organization, covering a large region, having 2 separate offices plus some home-based employees, is there is not a lot of intentional time to connect. We have a monthly staff meeting where you come, you do a very specific agenda, and it's the same all the time. The Story Circle was an intentional opportunity to connect different staff members around very lighthearted conversation and activities that we aren't normally used to and wouldn't take the time to do otherwise. So I think it just sort of provided this new atmosphere and experience for people to kind of get out of their normal thought process and talk about things that wouldn't happen in normal conversation. And certainly, we wouldn't necessarily all be together in that space otherwise.
Yeah, okay. And so I want to actually ask Jen a similar question. I posed it to Ashley first, and I'll pose it to Jen. Jen, you talked about that there's this major transformation, this emotional and psychological transformation from garden apartments into a high-rise, and so clearly there's a need to approach that transition with empathy and help people make that, get people to make that transition in a way that is right for them. So is that why you hired Rachel, or what led you to think, wait a second, we need something that only Arts and Rachel's approach can add to this mix?
I think the way the arts programs are coming into that process is they're doing a couple of things. They're kind of providing some very on-the-ground programming experiences for the residents, and also staff who are working with the residents, be it community health workers, community builders, education specialists, to have kind of new colleagues doing the kind of work that they're doing, which is to kind of reach out to residents, take stock of where they are, and to figure out kind of what their needs are and sort of how they can help those folks lift up the community. So there's kind of like an on-the-ground thing that the arts programs are doing. And then I would say, from the development side, the arts programs are pushing the actual redevelopment process and the way the institution thinks about redevelopment in a way that is more holistic and kind of thinks about alternative strategies to create places. So, they may have been working for, 10 plus years to kind of develop the master plan for the Yesler Terrace community, but, once everything is kind of built or becoming built, then sort of what happens and how do we fill and how do we activate the public spaces? And so having somebody, I sit on the development staff in the development department, so essentially on the real estate team. So having somebody, and this is similar, I think, to what Ashley was saying, having somebody at the table, reminding them that this is part of the narrative, or at least I'm lucky to work in an institution where they do have a progressive approach to opportunity and thinking about what that means beyond just a brick and mortar building. But, having being part of the narrative in terms of, what will our residents need as they kind of enter into this new community, what sort of questions should we be asking, and sort of what information can I bring, having worked with artists working in the community about, where the residents are at. And so it's a very powerful and it's an added layer of information in the narrative within the institution.
Well, Jen, will you give us a specific example of a insight or an aha that was brought to that table that wouldn't have been brought there otherwise?
Let's see. Well, we could go back to the lobby just because we've already sort of talked about the lobby program that Rachel did.
Yeah.
But, I'll just point out again that our architects and developers, they built these beautiful community rooms in each of the new SHA buildings. So these are the buildings that serve only SHA residents, low-income folks. And so, we started by doing programming in the community rooms because essentially, presumably, that's what they were for. But then, the residents weren't coming. They were feeling like there's a door. You have to enter the door. There are a lot of barriers to participation in our community. And so just by shifting physically the table where the artists were working and the programming to in the evenings, in the lobbies where people were passing through, suddenly it became much more of a kind of home-based personal program where people could come down. I mean, Rachel has lots of stories of people coming down in their PJs and going upstairs and eating dinner and coming back down. But, they're really starting to feel like, it just took on a much more personal nature. And I think that was, a good lesson for the architect and development team to think about in terms of, how are all the spaces being used and, what are the sort of physical barriers and design barriers to access? And, how is it that the residents want to use their, how is it that the residents want to use their buildings? The other quick example that's a little bit different is that, we have a particular situation where the folks that are coming into the neighborhood as part of this planned community are living in workforce or market rate rental apartments. And so they have a higher income, they have different experiences, there's a different demographic profile there. And so, it is, I think, the kind of success of the community as a whole really, in some ways, in part hinges on, whether or not, how is it that, these two kind of disparate, if we pool them together, groups are going to come together. How is it that they live together?
Right. Having a unit side by side is not enough, right?
Yes. So the build, and it's by building. But we early on, sent the artists over there to, and it's a lot of 1 to 2 bedrooms. So not as much family housing, highly amenitized buildings, and so a lot of the events that they were planning, the property management staff for those buildings were cocktail hours or stuff that, wasn't part of our Yesler Terrace programming. And so I think it was really important for us to not only, we can invite them to our programming, but, it was important for our artists to go and make presentations about their work, talk about the history of the community. Not everybody who moves into a building kind of knows the story of their neighborhood, and to do it in a way that the artist can provide a real bridge for those folks and the history of the neighborhood. And so we met with a relative amount of success doing that. Early on in the residency years, which was astounding to all of my development colleagues because they really hadn't been able to get traction, but suddenly it became this tool which could be kind of like a crossover opportunity, provide crossover opportunities.
Yeah.
Can I add to that too? I think that the thing about having visual art where you can come together and have it be something that's just in the lobby that you can just walk through, you can do it for 2 minutes or 2 hours, was that it drew in, there's a lot of groups at the Yesler Terrace community that are sort of grouped more by language group or religion or culture group or something like that, but this was a nonverbal way to interact even just be side by side, kind of playing around with things. It was social, but also you could just go and be quiet and paint for a little bit. So we saw people coming together who might not have in any other way in the community.
Yeah.
Super. I wanted to ask a question for Rachel and Ashley, our artists. Maybe we'll start with Rachel since we're talking about Yesler now. But it would be great to hear a little bit just about what you were expecting when you got started. You know, you have a background, both of you have already worked as community engaged creative practitioners, right? And so you probably came with some expectations based on your experience professionally and also perhaps your experience in that place. Because I know, Rachel, you have a history with Yesler Terrace as well. So what were you expecting when you got started, and can you share with us something that surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, I was expecting that, you know, I would set up a class or a curriculum and people would come, and that didn't really happen. I eventually figured out that I just needed to like loiter a lot, like just be like that. You know, emails weren't really a way to communicate in this community. That sometimes the phone, but mostly just being present and maybe having something for people, you know, to play with that wasn't just talking, but just being around, getting to know people, and yeah, loitering, talking with the guy, the Sylvester, smoking a cigarette on the corner, like the sort of getting the lay of the land. I also thought that I would be doing like recording people's stories about the place, which I did a little bit of, like have them take me for a walk and sort of map out a memory that they have of this place, that the landscape that is radically sort of being changed and altered, to have a sort of a memory map and then like an oral history story about it. And then I thought I would, you know, turn that into a podcast, turn that into an audio walking tour, which I'm still going to do, and there are those, but those, when people started to tell their stories, it turned more, I realized it wasn't about me like collecting their story and doing something with it, but that their act of telling their story was their ritual to sort of transition from the old garden housing into the new housing, and a way to kind of grieve and say goodbye and mourn it and then say hello to the new thing. So I ended up spending just a lot of time and then not recording things, because a lot of people, particularly like women, if I asked if I could record it, they were like, no, I have nothing to say. And so then I wouldn't record it, and then they'd be like, and then, you know, tell me some more. So really, like, I realized my job was to listen, and to listen deeply, and that there wasn't a product that I was going to be using that for. Yeah.
We hear this a lot.
Her head.
Yeah. Well, and I want to say we hear this a lot, that there's that something about arts and creativity is actually about activating other people's agency rather than treating them as participants. And so sometimes it can mess with that notion of, is there a product at the end that is the art product? And actually that process of growing agency and power is one of the most important things. Nella, back to you.
Oh yeah. So Ashley, I feel like you probably have some similar but slightly, you know, specific in your context reflections on that question, and also on what Rachel just said.
Yeah, well, I echo all of what Rachel just said, but you know, just the act of telling the story about a place or about home, how that reconnects you to that place, that home, so that you then want to become a better steward of that place and that home, and want to be more connected to that place and the people that live there. And I think specifically working with the staff, I really saw it as providing tools that they can also use then in their community engagement work. So by being an example of somebody who's a deep listener, one of the like small things that I did in the office was transform my cubicle space into this like really artful, creative, kind of flowy, colorful space, right? Just was totally different. There's a couch in there, and it just has become this kind of like creativity doctor space. So if somebody has a challenge that they're dealing with, they just come in and we chat. We like these pods. We like put on the nice lighting, and we have a nice conversation about, brainstorming about new ideas for programming and thinking about it differently. And I think, working in something like affordable housing, it can get really, because of the restrictions around the grant funding and all of the paperwork, it can get really nuts and bolts. But at the end of the day, you're providing homes for people. So how do we remember to humanize that? How do we remember to bring the human element in? I was talking with my friend Anna Claassen about this, who's on the call as well today. But just like the personalization of these issues and helping us to connect with the really important work that we're doing on that human level, so we don't get bogged down by the nuts and bolts. And then I think as an artist, like the question that you had asked before about what surprised me, I'm used to working with really small communities, like 368 people, but this was a community of 25, 26 people that I got to, and the gift of that, like the gift of getting to look at this microcosm and see the inner workings of a very small staff community like that, who then can go out and have that impact, was huge. And then to get to learn more deeply about the affordable housing, as like an issue, and again, personalizing this issue, has been such a gift, because I usually spend a long amount of time learning about a place and a lot of different challenges and issues within that place, it kind of sprinkled throughout. But this was a different approach, like learning about the ways in which our system addresses this need. And I'm still learning a lot about that, but then I can, use that to then impact the places that we work rather than the other way around. So that has been a huge gift as well.
Great. So I have a question now for Chelsea and for Jen. I think both of you have really different backgrounds coming into this moment where you wanted to partner with artists in your organizations. And Jen, you have a depth of experience in art administration. How did that help you? How did your previous experience help you? What were you ready for, maybe that others in the development world wouldn't necessarily be ready for, and what weren't you ready for?
So yes, I was a lot. My background is in museums, and I've worked with artists. I've worked with artists in residencies and community-based programming, but I had never worked, for the government or in the housing context. So I was ready to develop a strong program. I was ready to kind of be able to assess what artists I thought would be a good fit, and how I would kind of get those artists to come into the community, and what my own standards for what I thought was quality community engagement. I was not ready for the bureaucracy and and just what process really looks like in a housing context. So there was a really steep and hard learning curve for me there. I will say that, I was lucky to be in an institution where I felt very respected in terms of the level of expertise I brought to the table on the arts, and also, for better or worse, I think nobody really had any idea kind of what to expect from this crazy arts program. And there were, in terms of kind of battles or just hurdles I had to get over from the very beginning, were just things like, what should the arts programs be doing? And for that particular question, there was a kind of hurdle with the residents, and there was a hurdle with the institutions. So I think for the residents, this is not an arts programming rich community, and so they really wanted to see after school programs for their kids. They wanted to see youth programs. They wanted to see painting, drawing, and that's not really what our program is about. Our program is much more connected to kind of big picture concepts around place, and how can we use art strategies to explore those things. And so it took some doing to sort of acknowledge the community's needs, but also to be able to really stick with the kind of narrative and the sort of agenda of the placemaking project we were working on. And I think, my kind of inexperience in housing was helpful in the sense that, I could ask a lot of questions that were often assumed, and, I could use language and present in ways that people kind of just, they really didn't have any expectations. And so it was put on a lot of different tables and trying to use that to my advantage as much as I could. And I think that being able to work with the artists and having had experience with big picture thinking and how artists work and how artists kind of process and what their working methods are, kind of helped me to be able to really articulate to the artists and to work with them on what would quality programming look like, because this is very difficult work. There isn't really a sort of professional, there is a professional field around it, but not in the same way, not in the other ways artists traditionally work. And so there's a lot of learning curve for the artists as well. I think that, my experience and inexperience both was helpful, and then we were also just figuring things out together.
Yeah. And Chelsea, you definitely were figuring things out together with Ashley, I know. As you went, you had a little bit of a different background coming in than Jen. What were you ready for, and what weren't you ready for?
Well, I wasn't ready for a lot. I'll just set the stage there. And, to add to the complexity, I was very new to the organization when the Artplace CDI effort started. I started with the partnership in July of 2015. We were awarded the funds in August or September of 2015. I came to the partnership with 12 years of public sector planning and community development experience, so I was very immersed in the traditional community engagement strategies, which are like public hearings and workshops you hold at the city council level, right? So very top-down, very intimidating to most people, and then you add the complexity of diversity and the disconnect that many of those community members often feel from their community, and then you're trying to engage them in traditional top-down ways. What I was ready for is I could acknowledge the challenges there, and I knew that there had to be better ways to address those engagement and outreach methods. And I think it's so important to point out that you don't have to be the expert, or you don't have to be, necessarily know all the answers, as long as you can acknowledge that there is some sort of challenge or opportunity that exists, and I am open to addressing it in a different way. And I think that was huge, and I think that that when we started in this work, there was more skepticism around, are there different ways to do things? And as we brought Ashley in and people got used to that conversation and dialogue, people opened up a little more. But we also saw that with our communities as well. As Ashley mentioned previously, we worked with 3 different communities, and each one had a different level of skepticism. I would say the one that we've had the most success in was willing to acknowledge there were challenges in their community that need to be addressed, and they were okay working in that space of uncertainty. Like, we're willing to try these new ideas and strategies out with you, understanding we aren't really sure where it's going to take us. Right. And then we had some that didn't really want to acknowledge there were any challenges that need to be addressed, and they just really wanted an opportunity to make art.
Right.
And have us, help fund their art making in the process.
So it's striking me in both of your scenarios, there's this uncertainty and open-endedness that, the assumption that you come in with very likely will be rewritten. And if you see that as part of the creative process and the engagement process, then that's where you can actually get some of these transformations to happen.
Right. And I would say one of the biggest transformative moments for us was sort of this we were kind of at this standstill with one of our artist groups working in our community. And I can say all of this that I've said about being open to, looking at things through a different lens, but we are still very outcome focused.
Okay.
And so it was the biggest challenge for me was learning to let go of that outcome focus and really letting even though we can say we really want it to come, from the community up, what that means is we want it to come from the community up, and we aren't really sure what the outcome is going to be. We're going to let that sort of organically develop. And so we had this expectation in one of the very first projects we did that this is the outcome we want to achieve. Yes, we want to bring the artists in, we want to engage new community members in conversation, but here's the outcome we want. And their engagement and work in the community was leading them down a different path than we were anticipating. And it really took this sort of meeting of the minds and aha moment from us as an organization to say, oh, wait a minute, we're trying to lead this process in the way we think it should go when they're doing what they should be doing. They're working with the community, and we had amazing results. And I think it really shaped how we worked with artists moving forward and thought about how those projects could develop from there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I want to give anyone who's listening an opportunity to ask any questions that you have. Make sure to type them into the Q&A box because that's how we'll make sure to see them. So please take a minute. This is your chance to get your burning question answered. What I want to ask Jen in the meantime, while some of those questions come in, is Jen, you mentioned kind of a bureaucratic process. Have you seen Rachel's work influence and kind of shift any bureaucratic processes or cultures and move them in a different direction?
Well, I think, the vacant unit turning that into the Art Hub was a pretty big.
That was big. So when this is kind of predated my arrival at SAJ, but at some point there were many conversations about, can we provide a space for the artists? We have these units that are not going to be occupied, for temporary periods, short periods of time. Can an artist work in one of those? And the answer was absolutely not, because the public perception of that is that, if there is a apartment available, that should go to somebody who needs a place to live. And so, which I think makes perfect sense, except for, maybe some of the artists wouldn't have been occupied anyway, so it's kind of what's the harm. And then, there's a lot of, essentially, SHA was taking a storied community of low-income folks and then transitioning it into a mixed income development. And so in the context of Seattle, which is undergoing massive and very challenging development, this was really under the scrutiny. The redevelopment received a lot of public scrutiny and criticism. And so there's just a lot of sensitivity around, the public's perception, as you'll have in a bureaucracy and from an institution. And so I think it's a real kind of marker of change in the institution that, it took a few years, 2 years, but after having seen the kind of work that Rachel was doing, after having witnessed what the residents were gaining from engaging with an artist and having a place, that the fact that she had kind of loitered enough to really get our property management staff on board and other ground level folks on board, not just the executive director of SHA or the director of development, that she was sort of able to really kind of be visible to a sort of real spectrum of folks who are doing this housing work, that they were able to find her a unit that she could turn into a temporary community art space. And so that is huge.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there's so many kind of concerns and precautions around just doing stuff. I think within a bureaucratic organization, and so that was a huge hurdle and unexpected from the beginning. Yeah.
So I think we have time for maybe one point of advice from the developer to artist perspective, an artist to community developer. Maybe Nella, I'll have you maybe line that up for maybe one of each of our speakers to give.
Great. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we may have future fellows on the line. We definitely have current fellows and probably some host organizations on the line. We have a lot of people interested in doing this work from whichever side. So it would be really wonderful to close out just getting a quick word of advice from each of you. What's advice that you would give? And it can be, you know, artists giving an advice to a community developer or whoever you think needs the piece of advice the most. And we'll go, how about Jen, Rachel, Chelsea, and Ashley in that order. What's your piece of advice for people entering
just
and
one.
taking inspiration from
Yeah,
work?
just one, right?
Piece.
So my advice as a arts person, now working in housing, is to kind of, for the housing or community developer, the non-arts person, to really lean, to sort of figure out who they are and to lean on the artist community and network in your city or your town or wherever. And I would say that because, you know, artists are, I think they're used to doing this work. They're used to facilitation. They're used to translating big concepts into kind of real live experiences. And so, you know, I think that there are many more similarities in the working process than I think we kind of assume. And I would turn to those artists and art organizations and arts networks, maybe in the form of a board or an advisory group or even a pool as a potential source for artists to work in your community, either through and also to develop partnerships to kind of do the kind of programming that you are interested in. Because oftentimes, I think as somebody who came from an arts institution, those institutions are looking for how can we develop closer ties with pockets of the community. And so I think it can be a really symbiotic relationship if you find the right partner.
And I would just say too, I think that it's really helpful, I don't know if it's essential, but for the artists to have history in the community that they're coming into, or at least spend a lot of time researching and getting to know the landscape. I mean, I'm fortunate because like my great grandparents lived in SHA housing, and so I grew up visiting. But I think that is really critical, that the artists not come in and be like, I'm gonna come and put this art thing in and leave, but that like they have something at stake too.
Yeah.
Chelsea.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess one of my main pieces of advice would be for developers and communities who have come to the acknowledgement that they are ready for this type of partnership, really supporting the artist in their work of discovery with the community. And that's time and that's funding. Oftentimes we work within structures of both, but really this work, good work, takes time and support of the artist in doing that. And again, really letting the process lead to solutions rather than trying to figure everything out, what you think you're trying to achieve up front. Really allowing that process to figure out what the community needs are and developing solutions from that.
Super. And Ashley?
Yeah, I think in community work we talk a lot about trust building and what does that really mean and what does that really look like. And I think, where artists live that do this kind of work, this social practice, this community engaged work, we live in the space of vulnerability. And in that space of vulnerability is where trust lives. And I think for both developers and artists going into the space of not being afraid to be vulnerable and not be afraid to take those risks, because that's where trust lives. And once you get past the trust phase, that's where you find the love phase. And how often do we talk about love in this work when really we're doing this work because we love it and we love people. We have compassion for people and places and where people have come from. And so not being afraid of that vulnerability that leads to trust, that leads to the love that we need to do this work well, deeply and well.
Yeah, that's a great point to end on. So I want to say, first of all, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Nella. Thank you to Frederick. This is our final conversation in this series of webinars on the topic of culture and creativity in community development. But that series is out there. It's archived. You can watch it. You can see us go deep in a pro forma and understand how you fund the arts. You can hear us zoom out and think about questions of community resilience and climate change. So if this was an interesting and important conversation to you, this is an opportunity to really get under the hood of this kind of work in these projects. You can learn from these. And there's also going to be case studies coming out, as Nella mentioned, in addition to other tools and resources. So stay tuned for the announcement of the Rose Fellowship opportunities for community-engaged artists and architects coming in early February. And thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, everyone.
And with that,
Thank you.
And with that, for the session. Thank you again to our panelists and everyone who's joined us in this series. We look forward to connecting in the future. Have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.